Toolbox.
Internet.
A stream online.
TNTRadio.live. Today's News Talk Radio. TNT.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to TNT, Today's News Talk. We're broadcasting live for the next 2 hours. We're still in hour number one of this program today, and appreciate you guys, especially everybody in the TNT chat community. We can see the numbers growing there again today. We passed the high watermark of 140 members in there yesterday. Let's get those numbers up to 150 today if we can. We'll interact with you when we're able to during the program, but in the meantime, I want to welcome onto the program a very special guest, David Miller from the United Kingdom. He is an academic. He is also on the cutting edge of a major debate, testing the limits of speech in the democratic world. I don't think I'm exaggerating there. I think it's a very important case which David is facing, his own case, plus the legislation coming into the pipeline right now in the UK, but also in the United States. We see similar moves and resolutions in the US Congress to basically regulate speech, especially surrounding the issue of Israel. So let me welcome onto the program David Miller right now. David, thank you for joining us this week.
It's a pleasure.
David, before we get into some of the bigger issues regarding speech legislation, you're embroiled in a long-running battle personally with yourself professionally, a major case regarding academia, I think, and also could set a precedent right now. For those of our listeners who aren't familiar, or viewers who aren't familiar of your case, give us a little bit of a summary of what happened to you and then where this is at right now, the process that you're engaged in. Go ahead, David.
So I was a professor of political sociology at the University of Bristol in the UK. I gave a lecture some 6 months after I'd started there on Islamophobia, in which I discussed the role of Zionism in pushing Islamophobia. Some students complained. There was a long process of going backwards and forwards. I was cleared 3 times of anti-Semitism, and then I was summarily sacked for upsetting the students, and I appealed. The appeal failed. I then took the university to court in October last year, some nearly 3 years after I had been sacked. The court proceedings lasted until December. We're now waiting for the judgment, but the key question in the judgment is not the first point of my legal case, which was that I was wrongly dismissed, which I think is pretty clear. The key point is the second point which we made in my case, which was that the reason that I was sacked was because of my anti-Zionist views. That I have anti-Zionist views. I've been an anti-Zionist for some considerable time, and that I had expressed anti-Zionist views in criticising Zionist student groups and indeed the Zionist movement more broadly for its role in Islamophobia, and that was the reason I maintained that I was sacked. And in the case, the university witnesses started off by claiming that wasn't the case. It was because I'd upset students, but eventually it became clear that really what they were concerned about with the things I'd said was the fact of the anti-Zionism. So I'm hoping that the judgment will, which will come out any day now, will confirm that it was the anti-Zionist views which led to me being sacked, and that the anti-Zionist views are, to use the technical language in the British Equality Act of 2010, are worthy of respect in a democratic society. Now, the technical meaning of that in the legal test where you used to establish whether particular views are worthy of respect is, are these views akin to Nazism or not? Now, in the particular case, the university changed its actual legal case at the last minute as we started the tribunal, and it maintained that my views were akin to Nazism, which was a terrible, terrible legal mistake that they made, changing their strategy like that. Of course, they couldn't establish any such thing, and they tied themselves up in terrible, terrible knots in that process. So we're in the territory of potentially establishing the principle that anti-Zionist views of the sort that I espoused are protected in law, and it would be illegal to discriminate against people with anti-Zionist views. So the hope is that this establishes the principle that will protect many others from their employers' arbitrary sackings and disciplinary offences going forward.
And did you face this problem, which is now a serious problem, whereby the institution or the establishment has conflated anti-Zionist views with, quote, anti-Semitism, and then they're following the International Holocaust Remembrance Association's definition, the IHRA's definition of anti-Semitism, which continues to expand by the year. But is that a challenge that you ran up against in making these arguments?
Oh, absolutely. When the complaints were first made, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's working definition had not been adopted by the university, and the Zionist students who eventually made the formal complaints complained and appealed the rejection of their complaints on the basis that the university hadn't used the IHRA. The university then unilaterally offered to the student to pause the complaint while they considered whether to introduce the IHRA, and some 6 months later they duly did introduce the IHRA, and then they started the complaint so that I could be judged under rules that they had just introduced. And of course that didn't work for them because, of course, the QC, external QC, who investigated the complaint determined that nothing I had said was in any way anti-Semitic, and nor indeed did it breach the IHRA. Although, of course, as you say, the reason for them introducing the IHRA is that they try and sort of criminalize or smear anti-Zionist views as if they are anti-Semitic. As everyone knows, the examples appended to the IHRA mainly discuss Israel as opposed to discussing racism against the Jews. And that, of course, is the whole purpose of the definition, is to use a bludgeon to get to pursue Israeli foreign policy objectives throughout the world.
Yeah, because it's pretty clear your career, David, and your organization, Spin Watch, and even your Twitter ID is @TrackingPower, which is exactly what you've been doing. Your whole career is identifying how power, the dynamics of power, works between government, society, and in the international relations field as well. So it's pretty clear where you're coming from on that. And I think it's really important. And just before we move on, what are the prospects in your case? Are you positive in terms of the long-term outcome on this?
Well, I'm optimistic that we will have a good judgment on this very soon. If we don't have a good judgment, we'll appeal, because it's perfectly plain the university wasn't able to make its case, and actually the witnesses from the university all collapsed under the weight of the contradictions of their evidence. So we'll certainly appeal, but I'm hoping for a good result. The whole point of this, of course, is to push back against the overwhelming deluge of pressure that there is from the British state, under, of course, its own pressure from the Zionists, to criminalize pro-Palestinian activism. So we've had complaints and legal actions and police actions against people having particular leaflets or flying Palestinian flags or using the phrase "from the river to the sea," even having cartoons of people in paragliders, which are held to somehow glorify or justify terrorism. These people have been taken into custody and have been arrested or sometimes charged with the offences. People were charged with a racially aggravated offence for holding an effigy of a dead baby on a pro-Palestinian demonstration, as if that was somehow racist against the Jews. On the contrary, it's an anti-racist statement. But that's the pressure that we get. And of course, the government itself is trying to introduce a new anti-BDS, that's boycott, divestment and sanctions legislation, to make it illegal to boycott Israel, to make it illegal to boycott the pursuers and purveyors of genocide. I mean, truly, truly extraordinary times that we live in, but that's where the law is going. And I'm hoping my case will be the start of the fight back against that, because this will not go away without us standing together and fighting back against these ridiculous rules and regulations and defeating them once and for all.
I put this under the banner, at least this is in the United States, where we're going through similar challenges, David, as you know. But I'm put it under broadly under the banner of speech control, because with all of the town square, if you will, the global digital town square coalescing online on these major social media platforms, that's where the majority of the discourse is happening. You see moves by governments to seize control of these platforms, at least to control the speech on them by AI or algorithmic means, or physically, in the case of Twitter, the massive trust and safety departments at Facebook as well, basically looking and policing speech. In the UK, David, and your case is a bit of a canary in the coal mine early. You're an early symptom of this, I think, with your case. But what is coming down the pipeline now in the UK, especially regarding this issue as it relates to the anti-Semitism speech or the accusations of anti-Semitism, and also in relation to BDS? I think those are absolutely linked, because isn't BDS really just taking a political stance? So in effect, are we talking about censoring political speech across the board? What's happening in the UK right now?
Well, yes, it is about censoring political speech. Of course it is. I mean, but let's remember that we live in a society where the hegemon, the Western hegemon, the US, is in decline. And although it tries, along with its allies in the UK, to impose order, this order is continually failing to be imposed. So it's very difficult for them to impose order on the social media companies, even though the social media companies are themselves very, very keen to adhere to the pressure and to respond to the pressure that they're given. Facebook, of course, a company with very many Zionists in senior management positions, as well as, of course, taking advice from Zionist bodies on who to censor. Twitter or X is a slightly different case, which we could talk about. But of course, Elon Musk is fairly idiosyncratic, and of course, it's meant that in some respects, Twitter or X has become much more responsive to the public mood since he's taken over. But of course, there are also other ways in which he's now trying to interfere with it. Symptomatic of that, of course, is his statement that from the river to the sea is a genocidal and racist statement and will not be allowed henceforth on X. But since then, of course, its use has gone through the roof and increased by several magnitudes, because, of course, he can't stop people using a slogan like that because it's so popular. And that's, of course, the same with Facebook. Even though it is constantly censoring pro-Palestinian speech, it cannot remove the absolute dominance of pro-Palestinian views on Facebook and on Twitter, because that's world opinion. And so that's the difficulty they're facing, is their control. But look, it is a question of political speech. But let's remember also that the approach which is being pursued by the state of Israel in relation to academic freedom and in relation to freedom of speech, and its position on freedom of speech and on academic freedom is absolutely clear. We see that, of course, first of all, by the fact that they have destroyed every single university in Gaza, deliberately and calculatingly destroyed them, starting in late October and through to December. After they destroyed the Islamic University of Gaza by late December, they purposefully executed the rector, the president of the university, along with all of his family. So the view of the Zionists on academic freedom is that there should be no academic freedom at all for those who are pro-Palestinian. Now, it may seem hyperbolic to say this, but they would do the same with us in the UK and the US if they could get away with it. Of course, they can't get away with that. So what they do instead is that they send their agents and assets onto campus. They spy on students. They defame students. They try and have them sacked. They are able to sometimes get the very most senior officials in universities, as has been the case in Harvard and Penn, removed for the sin of saying something slightly less exacting than they would themselves want to have said about anti-Semitism. So they have a huge apparatus of disinformation, bullying, and intimidation on campus. I could go through some of the names of the organizations if you wish, both in the
Absolutely,
UK
yeah, please do.
And other countries as well. So, for example, there's an organization called the Israel on Campus Coalition, which is there to spy on students, and it uses and passes on intelligence through, for example, the Anti-Defamation League, an organization supposed to be about anti-Semitism, but which, of course, is always been very, very close to the Mossad and indeed to Israeli intelligence before the creation of the State of Israel. It has been the case. It was famously involved in a spy case in the 1990s where it was passing information to the apartheid regime of South Africa. And these agencies are there to spy on and collaborate with Israeli intelligence organizations. They also have an apparatus for producing trolls and troll farms and student groups on the campuses in the US. Of course, there's Hillel, which is the Zionist student organization in the UK. The same organization is called the Union of Jewish Students, and they're there to make sure that that no one can effectively do pro-Palestinian activism. But let's also remember that there are other organizations on campus that people are generally not aware of, which are also part of the Zionist movement. I'm thinking in particular of an organization called Chabad, which is a Hasidic sect which has 850 has presence on 850 campuses worldwide, including in Belarus and Russia and China and all the places you wouldn't expect them to have offices, but over 1,000 in the US. And it's an organization which believes that non-Jews have animal souls, that it's permissible to kill Palestinian babies because they might in the future grow up to threaten the settlers in Palestine, an organization which should have no place in any democratic society, but people don't even notice it's there to radicalize students on campuses across the US and indeed across the rest of the world. So there's a huge apparatus which the Israelis, the Zionist entity, and the Zionist movement in the US and other places. Of course, the US has the biggest Zionist movement in the world. They put this apparatus into play to make sure that it's very, very difficult to support the Palestinians, to call out genocide, to give meaningful solidarity to the Palestinians, and that's the apparatus of the Zionist movement in relation to academic freedom and freedom of speech.
And then also in terms of adopting the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. I know the Labour Party has more or less done this, if I'm not mistaken, and this is one of the things that happened after they ousted their former leader, Jeremy Corbyn. But there's a lot of pressure for that to sort of be adopted at a sort of higher level or integrated with legislation or something like this. I mean, how far along are they in that process? Because that seems like a major Rubicon to cross. If that were the case, what do you think about that issue?
Well, I mean, the IHRA is the weapon of choice of the Zionist movement. So, in addition to bullying and intimidating, the weapon for doing that, of course, it has been the IHRA. This was a working definition, as it's called, which was adopted by the IHRA in 2016. People think that's where it came from. It comes from this obscure organization, which is an international body. But actually, no, of course, it comes directly from the Zionist regime itself. They developed this definition in the end of the 1990s, in particular through the creation of the Global Forum for Countering Anti-Semitism, created in 2000. They then got this definition adopted by the European Union Monitoring Centre on Xenophobia, which is a formal part of the European Union, the European apparatus. And it was then on the website of that organization for several years, and then they removed it from the website, and it became effectively didn't have any fixed abode after that, and that led to a crisis talks within the Global Forum for Countering Anti-Semitism in the period of 2013, 14, and 15, where they said what we've got to do is we've got to find somewhere else to lodge this definition, and of course the place they found was the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, an organization which is effectively run by the Israeli government, and they then adopted that in 2016. That allowed them then to have the weapon to, as you referred to attack the leader of the Labour Party, the most pro-Palestinian leader of the Labour Party or any party in this country had ever had. And so the weapon was used to attack Corbyn. And of course, in order for that to be effective, they couldn't just have this definition which lay there as on a computer or on a website. They had to have people to enact and to use the weapon. They had to have feet and boots on the ground to do that. And so, of course, in the UK, starting from around 2009, but especially from 2014, the Zionists created a huge number of new pro-Israel organizations, 40 or 50 new organizations in the UK. Some have now got out of use and have been closed down because they've their function has been concluded. But they created all these organizations which could then take complaints against Labour councillors or Labour Party members or members of solidarity groups, and they could then use these complaints to try and have them removed from being candidates or members of the party, etc. And of course, that's the way in which it operates. They have this weapon, the definition, and they have boots on the ground, coordinated from Tel Aviv, and in many cases with money directly from Tel Aviv to undertake this activity. And some people think, that. In fact, people say the Zionists, sometimes the liberal and leftist Zionists say, "Oh, well, you think that the Zionist movement is all coordinated," and of course, it's not all coordinated. There are many different strands of Zionist ideas. There are the left-wing ones and the right-wing ones, and of course, this is true. There are left and right-wing Zionists, but of course, they're all united on the fact of being, and the clues in the name, Zionist, and that means, of course, believing in the genocidal idea that there's a right to a Jewish state in historic Palestine at the expense of the Palestinians. All Zionists believe in that, whether they're nice liberal and left Zionists or not. And of course, they all work together to do that. And of course, what they also, and we've found evidence of this in our research, they also coordinate together. So right-wing revisionist Zionists will coordinate with people who regard themselves as being socialist Zionists in order to attack the enemies of Zionism, which of course is the Palestine Solidarity Movement.
Yeah, and there's other groups that also, kind of act as lobbyists really for this type of activity, like Hope Not Hate, these sort of NGOs. There's an interesting one called UN Watch, I think. I think that's what it's called. And that's just unbelievable, the stuff they're doing.
Many organizations. I mean, on the example of Hope Not Hate, I mean, I think you see in both the US and UK, I imagine it may be the same in France and Germany. I haven't looked. But in the UK, what happened was that very early on, the British anti-racist movement became infected with Zionist ideas. And the way it did that was because after the Second World War, an anti-fascist group was created, mainly with returning Jewish ex-servicemen, many of whom were in the Communist Party. And they set up this organization, an anti-fascist organization, to block fascists on the streets. And they did fight the fascists. And so people in history think of this as a left-wing organization. There were many communists involved. But actually, of course, at the very, very beginning of that organization, by 1948, the beginning of 1948, this organization of left-wing anti-fascists sent tens of its members to fight the Palestinians in the Nakba, and was engaged in that fight. And of course, also, the whole of the organization signed up to, affiliated to the Irgun, the revisionist Zionist terrorist organization, which had bombed the King David Hotel, killing I think 91 people, including many British military and other personnel. So at the very beginning of the anti-racist movement in this country, there was a strong revisionist Zionist current, and that current has remained all the way through from the 1940s to the present day, including the setting up of an organization called Searchlight, the anti-fascist newspaper, and indeed the Community Security Trust, which is the UK's equivalent of the ADL. Both of these organizations were set up with people who came from the organization which had originally affiliated to the Irgun. And Hope Not Hate, which you mentioned, of course, comes from Searchlight, and Searchlight famously was revealed in the 1970s as coordinating not just with British intelligence, but also with Israeli and indeed South African intelligence to spy on the left and to spy on the pro-Palestine movement, all under the cover of being an anti-fascist organization. And of course, the CST as well, an organization which runs point for the Israeli government, which collaborates regularly with the Mossad and has been involved with the Mossad for decades, even in its previous incarnation. So what we see is that there's a way in which the anti-racist movement in this country has been infected and compromised by its alliances with and the involvement of Zionists, whose blind spot, big surprise, is racism against the Palestinians, against Arabs, and of course against Muslims too.
Interesting how that all shapes up. Also, the Center for Countering Digital Hate, that's another organization we could talk about. Maybe we'll save that for after the break here. I'm with David Miller, UK academic. We're talking about testing the limits of speech in the democratic West, especially as it relates to the situation right now in Gaza. Let's take a break right now with TNT, Today's News Talk. And when we come back, we're going to talk to David about how this actually, in practical terms, has shaped UK politics and foreign policy. All this and more on the other side. You're listening and watching TNT, Today's News Talk. We'll be right back after these messages.
De-weaponizing weather with reality and perspective.
The trial of Michael Mann and Mark Steyn continues. Actually, it's Michael Mann suing Mark Steyn and some other people over comments that he was a fraud. And it's very, very interesting when I look at the facts of this. First of all, Dr. Mann would not allow anyone to see his actual work, which is really kind of strange. For those of you who follow me on Twitter, you see me make a forecast, but always display the reasoning and rationale behind it. Always show people what you are up to. And hey, if it does it, it does it. If it doesn't, it doesn't. That's the breaks. So you've got to be suspicious of that. Why won't you show your data? Now, as far as Dr. Mann being a Nobel Prize winner, this is from Geir Lundstedt, director of the Nobel Institute. Michael Mann has never been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. He did not receive any personal certificate. He has taken the diploma awarded in 2007 to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and to Al Gore, and has created his own authentic-looking diploma. The text underneath the diploma is entirely his own, and the diploma that the IPCC got has really nothing to do with what Michael Mann got. So what he did was, he got this piece of paper and literally created his own award. Now, I happen to be a volunteer strength and nutrition advisor for the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club here at Penn State. We have a couple of gold medalists. And a couple of those gold medalists I talked to about nutrition and training. Does that make me a gold medalist? If I were to say, hey, I'm a gold medalist in the Olympics, am I a fraud? You make the decision. This is TNT climate and weather watchdog meteorologist Joe Bastardi, asking you to enjoy the weather. It's the only weather you've got.
This is the Patrick Henningsen Show on TNT Radio.
All right, welcome back. Welcome back, folks, to TNT, Today's News Talk. We're still now number one of this live broadcast. Thank you for joining us. And we'll resume our conversation right now with our guest, David Miller. He is an academic from the United Kingdom. He also happens to be the co-host of an excellent program called Palestine Declassified on Press TV, co-host with Chris Williamson, former MP in the UK from Derby, who, coincidentally or not, was also ousted from his own party in the very same way that Jeremy Corbyn was. David, this thing with cleansing the Labour Party, sanitizing the Labour Party of wrongthink, we thought it had finished. We thought they had done the job, but apparently not. The latest victim of this, Kate Osamor, who's not a inconsequential member of the party. She is a former shadow minister holding a number of top positions in the government. She has just been ousted, and I have to go over to the reporting on this, and the first thing I see in the headlines is the board of British deputies, or the board of deputies of British Jews, this organization. They seem to be the end-all be-all when it comes to making determinations of who can be sitting in political positions or not. This is like an incredible situation. What did you make of this latest incident?
Well, it's an ongoing process of trying to cleanse the Labour Party of anyone who is willing to say anything publicly about the Palestinians. And of course, she made some rather innocuous comment about on Holocaust Memorial Day about the genocide in Gaza, and that, of course, is not acceptable. What the line is that you have to not mention Gaza. You have to absolutely not say Gaza is a Holocaust, and absolutely not say Gaza is a genocide. To do so is somehow anti-Semitic. Which, of course, is nonsense, and is just, of course, the Zionist talking point on the issue. Now, you mentioned the Board of Deputies. Now, the Board of Deputies of British Jews poses as a an organization which is there to represent Jews, and of course it only represents a proportion of Jews. It's elected through the mainstream synagogues. Most of the ultra-Orthodox synagogues don't partake of the board. But it used to be, back in the day, an anti-Zionist organization until the 1940s, when it was taken over by the Zionists in the mid-40s, before the creation of the State of Israel, the occupation of Palestine. But now, of course, it's and since then it's been very pro-Israel. It's become more rabidly pro-Israel in recent years. It unblushingly says in its annual report that it cooperates closely with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the IDF spokesperson's office, etc., etc. So it's a Zionist lobby group. It has 202 members, I think, up and down the country, which indicates this sort of the strength and the breadth of the Zionist movement in this country. But I wouldn't want your listeners of yours to think that it's the Board of Deputies which influences this issue, as if it's one organization that's doing that. Of course, the Zionist movement is a much bigger set of organizations. I've already alluded to the fact it has 200 odd members. But also there are other organizations which have a range of members. The Zionist Federation has around 35 members. The Jewish Leadership Council has around 35 members too. And then, of course, there are many other associated Israel lobby groups. But the key people who are infiltrating and influencing the Labour Party are not external lobby groups. Funnily enough, these are groups which come to lobby an organisation which is already taken over by Zionists, and in particular in the personage of a guy called Trevor Chin. He was one of the ones who was revealed. The two key Zionists who were revealed to have funded the leadership campaign of Keir Starmer, and they revealed it late, so that the votes had already been cast before people would find out. And when shortly after he was elected, he ran a meeting to discuss with the Israel lobby whether he had sufficiently cauterized the party and removed enough anti-Semites, i.e. people who were willing to support Palestine, from the party. And all of the key lobby groups were there. But also in the meeting was Trevor Chin. Now, he wasn't there as a representative of a lobby group, although he is, by any stretch of the imagination, one of the key leaders of the UK Zionist movement. He's been on the top of the United Jewish Israel Appeal, which is the biggest fundraising charity for Israel in the country for decades, literally decades. So he is effectively the leader of the Labour Party, the Labour Party. I mean, that's what I'm going to get into. He's the leader of the Zionist movement, but he was at that meeting not as a representative of an Israel lobby group, but as a representative of the Labour Party. He was there as a Labour Party official to be lobbied by the groups which he himself helps to run. I mean, truly extraordinary position. So, of course, this is going to go on and on through the party. Anyone who's willing to stand up and say anything mildly critical about the Zionists and the genocide in Gaza is going to be removed from the party. And it remains to be seen exactly how far that goes. We're waiting to see if, for example, John McDonnell, the deputy leader, who was the deputy leader, is going to be removed as well, because, of course, he said things which have been mildly critical of Israel, and so the question is whether all of the left, the remaining left, will be removed from the party or not.
The end result of this, David, is there's no discernible difference between the Conservative Party, the Tories, and Labour when it comes to what's happening right now in the Middle East. And there can't be a bigger example of a humanitarian catastrophe, as it's said by the International Courts of Justice, it's being labeled as a genocide. Investigation has already commenced on this. So, I mean, the international consensus on this seems to be pretty clear, but yet there's no movement within UK politics. I don't see any dissent basically to condemn Israel. It's incredible.
The broad point is correct, but I mean, I would point to two things. One is the recent change of heart of the British Foreign Office, which has said just the other day that it wants a Palestinian state for the first time. Now, that's really very, very interesting. We don't know what the choreography of it is and how it relates to the ongoing negotiations in Qatar over a potential ceasefire, etc. Clearly, there will be some relationship, but that's a very important signal. But I would also say that, look, your point about the Uni Party is absolutely correct, and of course it's correct in the US too. But in the Conservative Party, there still are people, the occasional person, who is willing to ask penetrating questions of the government. And there was a session the other day in Parliament where the Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, former Prime Minister David Cameron, who was elevated to the House of Lords in order to become Foreign Secretary, was put through his paces by a Tory MP, a new Tory MP, a woman called Alicia Cairns. Now, Alicia Cairns has a very interesting backstory. She was a Foreign Office official. She was either in MI6 or very close to MI6. She ran the propaganda operations in Syria for the British government, including involvement with organizations which were involved in the false chemical weapons attacks in Syria. And so she's by no means a leftist. She is, she probably still remains an asset of MI6, but she put him through his paces, and she said she wanted to pin him down and say, have you not seen any documents from Foreign Office legal advisors which say that Israel has broken international humanitarian law by the siege and by the attacks that it's done on the people of Gaza? And he squirmed really badly, and she really scored some points. And that was a very, very impressive performance from someone who, on many other political issues, you wouldn't expect any such thing. So there is some dissent within the system, not in the party system, but within the actual security apparatus. And you would expect there to be some dissent within MI6, the Foreign Intelligence Agency, as opposed to MI5, the Domestic Intelligence Agency, where dissent rarely ever happens, it's my understanding. So yes, there is a problem, but we are seeing some movements here. And of course, we've seen suggestions in the press that there will be an announcement on Saturday about a ceasefire, which looks like it won't be correct, but there clearly are negotiations in the background, where there's just feeding a kind of propaganda campaign, a shadow propaganda campaign about what's happening. The Palestinian resistance have said that they are not going to engage in a process which will undermine the Palestine Liberation Organization. And that's a really very, very interesting way of phrasing it, because of course, who would think that Hamas would be a fan of the Palestine Liberation Organization? Remember, this is the umbrella body which effectively runs the Palestinian Authority, and in which Fatah is dominant, and which Hamas has been excluded from, as have the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, two of the key armed organizations, they're military wings in Gaza. So what we know, of course, is that the whisper is that there's an attempt to bring in the Saudis, amazingly enough, and possibly the Qatari government to administer the West Bank and Gaza or Gaza. Now, of course, what Hamas are saying there is we're not going to go for that, and that there's no chance of having a negotiation which could be successful on the basis of that. So we're seeing some kind of shadow boxing going on in this negotiation, and I would bet that the British government statement about the recognition of a Palestinian state is part of that. Of course, we also saw, didn't we, amazingly, only 2 weeks after the British Labour Party said that they were not going to recognise a Palestinian state, as soon as the Tories said that they were going to recognise a Palestinian state, the Labour Party changed its mind again, and it's back on and said, "Oh yes, well, of course we always believed in a Palestinian state." Just a true, an obvious lie, but the kind of lie you get from uni parties when they're caught out in the algorithm of politics.
Yeah, that is interesting, David. That's going to come up as well in the UN General Assembly when this issue eventually lands there as well in this current legal process with the ICJ. And I'm going to say that comment you made, very interesting about that Conservative Party member showing some dissent there. We've also seen people who supported Bellingcat, regime change operatives in media and online have gone behind the Palestinians on this issue. So that's an interesting schism that you've identified that's very real, David, and very identifiable right across the board. So I think, and that could be within civil service as well, in the intelligence services. There are people who do have that political belief. They do on that issue. They support the Palestinians, but not on all the other issues that we might be covering and arguing. People like yourself and others, and more anti-imperialist, you could say, to use that term. But very, very good point. That's worthy of another discussion, by the way, David. Like a deep discussion on that. Maybe we'll have to assemble a panel on that one, because I think that tells a lot about the story of geopolitics, policy, and media over the last 10 plus years. But very interesting. David Miller, thank you very much. And before we go, just give everybody a shout out about your show, what you're doing on social media, where people can find your work. Go ahead.
Okay, so I produce and co-present a show called Palestine Declassified on Press TV, which is on X, formerly Twitter, at P Declassified. You can follow us there. I'm on Twitter at tracking_power. And maybe I say one word about my legal
briefly,
case.
I think we're running out of time.
My legal case, you can support my case at fightingfund.org.
Follow David Miller. You'll see the links to his legal case there. Get behind that. It's a good effort, folks. Thank you, David Miller, for joining us. Appreciate it. Top of the hour news headlines coming up. Stay with us. We got Zachary Foster, another academic, on the other side. We're going to deep dive into the ICJ genocide case and much more. Stick around. We'll be back in a few.